Mesopotamia means land between rivers, and it refers to the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and what is now modern-day Iraq. This area, part of the Fertile Crescent, has rich soil and a steady water supply. It's perfect for agriculture. It is the widespread development of agriculture in this area that changed everything. Instead of wandering around for food, people could finally settle down, plant crops, and build cities. This led to the creation of the building blocks of what we call civilization: permanent settlements, social hierarchies, organized religions, centralized government, division of labor, and, importantly for historians, written records. There's more, but this is a good place to start with our definition of civilization. To keep track of trade and crops, the first writing systems were created. Around 3000 BCE, the Sumerians developed cuneiform, one of the world's first writing systems. It started as pictographs and evolved into wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay with a stylus. This happened around about the same time as writing was developed in Egypt. But what makes Sumer so remarkable is how much of their world is recorded. Laws, prayers, economic transactions, myths. Writing allowed ideas to last longer than the people who wrote them. Now that humans didn't have to move around all the time, they could make bigger things. Not everything had to be portable. And when things get less portable, they tend to get bigger. This is when we start seeing the first examples of monumental architecture. One of the earliest and most important examples is the White Temple in Ziggurat at Uruk. Sumer was the first major Mesopotamian civilization. It was located in what is today modern-day Iraq. It's where we see the earliest cities, the first writing system, and the birth of monumental architecture. Sumerian society was organized around city-states, each with its own ruler and patron deity. The ziggurat sat in the middle of the city. A ziggurat is kind of a man-made mountain, a large step trapezoidal-shaped structure made from mud brick with ramps and stairs leading to the top. And at the very top was a temple, a place where priests could communicate with the gods. This temple wasn't for public use. It was reserved for the priesthood, who acted as intermediaries between the human and the divine worlds. So if regular Sumerians weren't allowed into the temple, what did they do? They left votive statues. These are small carved figures placed inside the sacred space to represent themselves. Think of these as spiritual stand-ins. They're always present, always praying, even when the worshiper wasn't around. And we know these were real individuals. They were actual people because many of these statues have names inscribed on the bases. That's how we know who they were. We finally have history now. We are given a deeper context about who a work and object belonged to, why it was made, and what it meant to the people who made it. The statues portrayed their patron in a very specific way. Clasped hands and, most famously, enormous eyes. Huge, staring, kind of creepy eyes. So why the big peepers? Is it because ancient Sumer was a highly caffeinated society? No. These eyes represent alertiveness and devotion, but maybe more than that. There's a spiritual alertness here, the idea of being awakened in the presence of the divine. They're in a state of divine awareness, and also probably in need of eye drops. And if you look closely, not all of them are the same size. This isn't random. Some are larger than others because the larger ones are more important. This is called a hieratic scale. The bigger the figure, the more power they held in Sumerian society. Let's talk about the standard of Ur, one of the most fascinating objects from ancient Sumer. It's a small wooden box found in a royal tomb at the site of Ur in southern Mesopotamia. We're not totally sure what it was used for. It might have been a musical instrument, a storage chest, or even a military standard carried on a pole. But what we do know is that the images on it are loaded with meaning. The box has two main sides, what archaeologists have nicknamed the war side and the peace side, and each tells a story in horizontal bands called registers. On the war side, we see a battle unfolding. Chariots trample enemies, soldiers march in formation, and captives are dragged before a central figure, a ruler whose identity is still debated, who's the largest person in the scene. On the peace side, the same large figure appears again, this time at the head of a banquet. He's flanked by servants, musicians, and attendants celebrating victory, enjoying the spoils. Just like the votive figures, we see hieratic scale at work. The king is physically bigger than everyone else, showing his importance and authority. His size tells us who's in charge without needing any words. I also have to point out that I think it's incredibly important that this all-powerful ruler is a bald man. Just saying. So what's this object really about? It's about two kinds of power that a ruler is expected to wield. The power of authority and protection, which we see on the war side. This shows a king who can defend his people and defeat their enemies. But then there's the peace side, where we see the king's ability to provide for his people. We see images of abundance, grain, livestock, food, celebration, wine flows, music plays. It's a picture of security, prosperity, and order. Together, the two sides offer a full picture of rulership, war and peace, strength and stability, conquest and celebration. All right, now let's move on to the Akkadians, one of the first empires. The Akkadians rose in the early 24th century BCE and eventually conquered the Sumerian city-states. This is the Stele of Naram-Sin. A stele is just a big stone slab with markings or carvings on it. It could be a gravestone, a monument to a battle, or just commemorating something important. This particular stele shows us Naram-Sin, the king of Akkad. And here we see Naram-Sin climbing a mountain, literally. Once again, we've got mountain imagery, used to show proximity to the gods. High places are holy places, and Naram-Sin is way up there. He's also shown in hieratic scale, towering over his enemies, bigger than everyone else. And that's, of course, not an artistic mistake. It's deliberate. Bigger means more important. Bigger means more powerful. And let's look at that helmet. It has bull horns, a symbol of divine authority in the ancient world. Bull imagery, as it relates to power, can be traced back to the earliest images of the Paleolithic. Here, like in many other early civilizations, bull horns were equated with authority. We see Naram-Sin standing victoriously on the heap of dead corpses of the defeated Lullaby people. Next to him is another victim who falls to his knees as he grasps the spear lodged in his neck thrown by the brutal Akkadian ruler. And then above at the top of the mountain, in the sky, we see 3 stars, probably representing 3 gods, watching from above. The symbolism here is that this is a divinely ordained victory. Naram-Sin's defeat of the Lullaby people has the approval of the gods. The mountain below Naram-Sin is chaos. There are no neat rows, no clean registers like we saw in the Standard of Ur. Instead, the bodies of his enemies are scattered, falling, crushed. Some are even nude, which in ancient visual language is often a sign of shame, defeat, and vulnerability. So this whole visual program is working together to say one thing. This is a king with divine authority. His enemies are nothing, and his victory is both brutal and blessed. Let's move back to Sumer, or more accurately, Neo-Sumeria. After the Akkadian Empire collapses, the Sumerians made a comeback, especially in the city of Lagash under the rule of Gudea. Let's take a look at the statue of Gudea holding a water jar. Right away, we can see the vibe is totally different from Naram-Sin. There's no chaos, no violence, no climbing over bodies. Gudea is seated, he's calm, composed, and carved from diorite, a dark, incredibly hard stone that was difficult to work with, but meant to last forever. That permanence says something about how he wanted to be remembered. He's holding a jar with flowing water, and if we look closely, we can even see little fish swimming in the streams. So what's going on here? This image is all about abundance, order. Gudea isn't presenting himself, though, as a conqueror. He's presenting himself as a pious ruler, one who brings life, prosperity, and stability to his people. And let's pay attention to his body. He's idealized, not in a flashy, heroic way, but in a way that suggests inner strength, wisdom, devotion. The text carved into the statue tells us he built temples and followed the will of the gods. So if Naram-Sin is the image of divine conquest, Gudea is the image of divinely approved leadership, a ruler who doesn't climb mountains but sits firmly grounded, channeling sacred power like water flowing through him to his people. In the 19th century BCE, the Kingdom of Babylon comes into power in Mesopotamia. It will initially hold influence for almost 300 years. One of the great rulers of ancient Babylon was the king Hammurabi. Let's take a look at one of the most important objects in the history of law, the Stele of Hammurabi. This is the first publicly displayed set of laws, at least that we know of. It wasn't hidden in a palace or kept in a temple. It was put in a public space for all to see. This was a way for the king to say, here are the rules. Everyone is accountable. And just like we've seen before, there's a mountain involved. At the top of the stele, we see Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, ascending a mountain to speak with Shamash, the god of justice and the sun. High places are holy places, and here the mountain becomes a meeting place between human and divine. The god Shamash sits above, enthroned, and he's handing Hammurabi two objects, a rod and a ring. These are symbols of rule, tools used to measure and create order. In this moment, Shamash isn't just giving Hammurabi a blessing, he's giving him the literal authority to rule and the power to enforce laws. And that's what this whole monument is about, divine authority. These aren't Hammurabi's laws, these are Shamash's laws. But Hammurabi is the one chosen to deliver and uphold them. He becomes the earthly extension of divine justice. Below that image, the rest of the stele is covered in text. Somewhere around 300 laws dealing with everything from contracts and theft to marriage and injury. It's carved into stone, making the law feel as permanent and unshakable as the gods themselves. Let's move on to the Assyrians, who ruled Mesopotamia with overwhelming force. Their palaces evoke this authority through the use of images of might and power. Standing guard at the entrances of Assyrian palaces were often placed massive creatures called Lamassu, mythical hybrids with the body of a bull or sometimes a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a man, with stacks and stacks of bull horns. These were guardians and representatives of the ruler's power. Looked at from the front, they seem still, but from the side they appear to walk. That's because they have 5 legs in total, and this is arranged for visual continuity. When seen from the side, they have 4 legs, and when seen from the front, they have 2. It's a visual trick designed to keep them powerful from every angle. Now let's turn to one of the most powerful and emotionally complex works of art from ancient Mesopotamia, the lion hunt reliefs from Ashurbanipal, carved into the walls of the palace of Nineveh. In these scenes, we see the Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, standing in a chariot, bow drawn as he faces down a charging lion. He's surrounded by attendants and guards, and the setting is clearly staged, a kind of royal arena where lions were released to be killed. The composition is clear and controlled, just like the figures themselves. Let's look at the humans. They're shown in what we call composite view, where each part of the body is turned to its most recognizable angle. The head is in profile, but the eye looks straight out like a fisheye. The torso is frontal, the legs in profile again. It's a formula not meant to look realistic, but to look readable. And more than that, the human figures all look kind of the same. The king is more detailed, but the attendants and soldiers are almost interchangeable. They're generic, idealized, iconic, not individual. We might think of them less as people and more symbols of people, disciplined, emotionless, and untouchable. But when we compare that with the lions, we see something else entirely. The lions are depicted as being full of life, tension, and emotion. Their anatomy is precise. The muscles ripple, the bodies twist, the faces snarl or cry out in pain. They are the opposite of symbolic. They are alive. Let's zoom in on the image of the dying lioness. She's been pierced by arrows. Her back legs are paralyzed, splayed out behind her. But she's still dragging herself forward with her front legs. You can see the strain in her shoulders, the tension in the stretched muscles. Her face is a mask of suffering and rage. Her ears are pinned back, her whiskers pulled tight against her cheeks. Her nose is wrinkled and her mouth is open in a roar of both pain and defiance. She is dying, but she's not giving in. In her last moments, she's raging against death, clawing at life with everything she has left. This is a moment of empathy. We feel something for her. We see her not just as an animal, but as a creature with a will, a presence, a dignity. And that's a huge contrast to how the humans are depicted. The lions feel real. The humans feel abstract and untouchable, elevated above the messiness of emotion. This tells us something about the art itself. In ancient art, humans are often idealized, made symbolic, because human figures often represent more than just people or a person. They represent systems, order, and control. But animals, and especially scenes like this, are allowed to be lifelike, emotional, and vulnerable, even heroic. And here, that contrast, it heightens the drama. The king's power looks absolute because the lion's struggle feels so real. Artists depicted some subjects more abstractly and others more realistically because of societal expectations on how those things were supposed to look. The Assyrian Empire collapsed in the late 7th century BCE due to internal strife and invasion. The Neo-Babylonian Empire emerged in its wake, marking a cultural and political renaissance in Mesopotamia. Reaching its height under King Nebuchadnezzar II, the empire is known for its ambitious architecture. Babylon became a major center of religion, science, and the arts, while also playing a key role in regional politics, including the conquest of Jerusalem and the Babylonian exile. The empire's dominance ended when Cyrus the Great of Persia captured Babylon in 539 BCE. The city of Babylon was divided into smaller districts that were separated by gates. The Ishtar Gate was the 8th gate and the largest, leading to the inner city of Babylon. It was constructed around 569 BCE by order of King Nebuchadnezzar II, and leading up to it was a long, walled processional way, spanning something like 800 feet up to the gate, containing around 120 reliefs depicting lions, bulls, dragons, and flowers. The gate was a part of a large New Year celebration where statues of the deities were paraded through the city. Lions along the processional way represented Ishtar. Bulls and dragons represented Adad and Marduk, respectively. The gate itself is a double gate structure with a small frontal gate and a larger, more elaborate secondary gate. It was decorated with blue glazed bricks, which was meant to allude to lapis lazuli, a rare and precious mineral. The gate itself is massive, somewhere around 15 meters above ground, with 14 meters leading down to the foundation underground. So once again, we see art doing what it's always done in this region. It's making power visible through scale and symbolism and spectacle. The Achaemenid Empire was the first Persian empire and one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. Founded by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE, it eventually stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west. It ruled over a vast number of peoples and cultures and is remembered not only for its military power, but for its administrative sophistication, use of infrastructure like roads and postal systems, and a relatively tolerant approach to governance across its diverse territories. Persepolis, in what is now Iran, stood at the center of the empire's ceremonial life. Built by Darius I and added to by later kings, it was not a working capital. No laws were drafted there and no battles were planned. It was where the king performed his role through ritual and display. The entire complex was built to impress, using architecture and ceremony to show the empire's power and order. The Gate of All Nations stood near the main entrance to the Persepolis Terrace. Visitors from across the empire would pass through it before entering the ceremonial core of the complex. It was the architectural threshold between the outside world and the sacred space of imperial rule. If we look at the Gate of All Nations, we can see that it is guarded by beasts, which are very, very similar to the Lamassu we saw in Assyrian culture. And once we go through the gates and enter the area of the Enheduanna, the large audience hall, we can see that it is a hypostyle structure. A hypostyle structure is basically just a large roof supported by rows and rows and rows of columns, or what we call colonnades. The capitals of those colonnades were depicted once again by Powerful animals, eagles and bulls being common symbols. And of course, this is something we saw throughout Mesopotamian art. And this use of powerful animals to denote kingly power here is no different. But where we really see a difference in between the art of the Achaemenid dynasty and the Mesopotamian cultures is in the depiction of the king and the way he interacts with his people. Leading up and around to the Appadana is a large processional frieze depicting the multicultural composition of the Achaemenid Empire. We see people wearing all sorts of different kinds of clothes and hairstyles. They're all bringing with them images of bounty, gifts, and foodstuffs. So once again, this is something that should be very familiar to you by now. We've seen it through the art of ancient Mesopotamia, the image of largesse, the ability of the ruler to provide. But this isn't because of the ruler's dominance or through violence. Here we're looking at an image of all these different cultures that have come together under the benevolence of the ruler. And it is because of this fairness that this bounty is available. Once we get to the actual Appadana, this processional frieze ends in an image of the king Darius sitting in hieratic scale on his throne. He's larger than everybody else. He's bearded, showing his kingly power. And standing behind him is his son Xerxes, also in hieratic scale. And we see that he is being addressed by a member of the court who holds his hand toward his mouth in a form of address. But once again, we don't see an image of powerful, violent rule as we did with the Assyrians and the Akkadians. But we see wisdom, benevolence, unification. And so while a lot of the symbols of Mesopotamia, the iconography is the same, the way it is utilized in the Achaemenid Empire is often quite different. In the end, Persepolis doesn't show us a king who dominates through fear. It shows us a king who rules through balance and diplomacy. Power here isn't just about strength. It's about the ability to unify a diverse empire and hold it together through respect, ceremony, and shared identity. The Persians used the visual language of power often found in Mesopotamian cultures, but here it has a different feel. From the first mud brick ziggurats of Sumer to the grand stone palaces of Persepolis, what we're seeing is how the earliest civilization used art and architecture to make sense of their world, to reach towards the divine, to establish order, to display power, and to preserve memory. Art in ancient Mesopotamia and Persia played a central role in religious practice, political authority, and social order. These cultures established models of how images could be used to structure belief and convey power and shape understanding, patterns that continued to influence later civilizations, including our own. Once again, guys, thank you for watching. Please click like and subscribe. I'd very much appreciate it, and I will see you next time.